All right, here we are. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. If you happen to be someone who's listening to the show for the first time today, let me welcome you. Everyone else, what's up? How are we doing? How are we doing? That's a good question. How am I doing is really what I'm asking, because I'm the only one sitting here right now. But I know that you're listening. Somebody's listening to this, and I am genuinely curious how you are too. I'm wondering if you're feeling the same malaise setting in that I'm feeling. I was just sitting here trying to find a bit of inspiration to bring to this intro, and I'm not going to lie, I wasn't not finding it. I don't think sitting there any longer is going to make a difference. So here I am in a very uninspired state. And I guess I'm trying to understand what are the obstacles, or what's keeping me from feeling inspired. Well, one, I'm spent. I think all this recent talks about higher powers and whether or not matter comes first or consciousness comes first. I think I'm just a little tapped out, maybe. But also, it's hard to stay attuned to that current of feeling okay and everything happening in its natural progression when it feels like there's clearly disturbances in the force or there's things that are awry, you can feel it. I can't be the only one who has that nagging feeling. It's not just paranoia, I don't think. And, speaking of this idea of whether or not there's an intelligence at work, or whether or not there's some kind of underlying force that responds to you, it seems to me that life just has an uncanny way of keeping things real, as they say, of putting to us the challenge that is at the heart of our understanding of ourselves. And it just seems to me that it's not just random. I've said that before here on the show. It can't be random the way all this is happening. Anyways, I hope you're doing okay. Maybe you're not feeling so tapped and uninspired. Maybe you've got a little inspiration to spare. What I will say is I'm feeling very inspired about you listening to today's talk with Lolly Stirk. I can't imagine a more perfect counterpose to some of the brain bending and soul searching that's been going on around here. As I think you will feel as well, Lolly has a wonderfully nurturing energy about her. That's probably because all of the work she's done over the years, helping usher people through the process of birth, of bringing in new life. And it really is all in the family, because it was my talk with her husband, John Stirk, a few months ago that led to some of the snowball that's been going on around here too. So it was fitting and just lovely to get her insights into the process of life and birth, and also the way that institutions have sometimes impeded that process. So again, it was a true pleasure, and I'm glad to be sharing it with you today. Real quick before we get to that, let me take a moment to acknowledge the support of our podcast premium subscribers. Today, I specifically want to say thank you to Coy Thompson and Jenna Galassi. What's up, Jenna? Cheers to you, Coy. Thanks, both of you. Really appreciate it. If you're new around here and you were not aware, The most recent 52 episodes of the show are always available in their full length on the public feed. But we do also have a podcast premium subscription that gives you access to the full archives and is really the way that we keep this show going. It's why there's no ads and all that other stuff that you get on a lot of other podcasts. If you appreciate what you hear and you enjoy the show and you want to see it keep happening, become a podcast premium subscriber. Just choose your rate and you can cancel at any time. If you want to learn more about becoming a podcast premium subscriber, or you can find all my stuff, all my regular classes and discussion groups and all the things that I'm doing, everything can be found at jbrownyoga.com. All right, y'all. That feels like a little bit of a chintzy intro, but like I said, I'm not really feeling all that inspired. So we're just going to trust that it's fine, and we're just going to let it be. I will touch base with you on the other side, but I think we'll just get to it, okay? Let's go ahead and listen to this conversation that I had with Lolly Stirk.
Hi.
Hi, Lolly. Nice to meet you.
Oh, nice to meet you, Jay. Once we've got that sorted out.
Yes, just a little glitchy technology happens every once in a while, but we're here, so that's all that really matters.
How lovely.
I am happy to get a chance to speak with you, and I am recording, so let's consider ourselves having just begun, okay?
Absolutely.
Wonderful. And first, let's just shout out John. I thought it was very sweet the way that he wanted to make sure that you got your due. And he told me that you were his first teacher.
Well, he's a sweet guy, so that's lovely to hear. And yes, when I met him, he had a really bad back. And I kept on saying to him, why don't you try this? Why don't you try this? And then one day he did, and there was no stopping him from then on.
And you won him over ever since.
Well, he took over fast lane. He was well into it. As soon as he got that connection, he just thought, right, this is the thing for me. It was mind-blowing for him to feel that connection. Yeah.
Well, I'll be frank with you, though. If it had just been him being like, hey, my wife's really cool, I wouldn't have done it. But it was also when I took a look at what you've done, what your work has been over the last decades, I was very intrigued. I have a lot of personal experience that we can talk about. I do have 2 children, and I've witnessed a few births and had to interface with like the Western medical establishment in regards to that.
Right.
So that's really why you're here, not just because John wanted me to bring you on, just for you to know.
Well, that's good. Thank you.
And what I would say, maybe just to kick us off, because I was, reading up a little bit about you, and I always look for kind of parallels to my own experience. And you're a few generations before me, and I always am interested at the way things have evolved over time and how people like yourself planted seeds that sprouted in many ways down the road. So I was looking and I noticed that you moved to London in 1969 when you were 19 years old. I moved to New York when I was 18 years old in 1990. Okay. And so it felt to me equivalent. And I'm curious, what was in your mind as a 19-year-old when you were moving to London? Did you have like an idea about a career path, or what were you looking to do? I mean, it was the late 60s. So What was your motivations in moving there, and where did you come from?
Well, I came from South Africa, which was incredibly repressive and, total lack of freedom. And I was sort of getting involved with politics and stuff in South Africa that eventually I sort of came up against a wall, and I thought I'm either going to stay here and dig in, or I'm going to travel the world. And being young and wanting to see more than South Africa, I decided to travel for a while. And I had friends in London who invited me to stay with them at the age of 19 and look after their baby, help look out, let's sort of become their au pair. So I had a kind of safe place to land in. And that's when I came 1969, and the feeling of freedom in the air was extraordinary. You know, it was the summer of love, and all the music and the people protesting, marching in the streets, and the fun side of it and the serious side of it. And, you know, the Beatles had just gone to visit the Maharaji in Rishikesh, and you know, it was all very exciting stuff. I couldn't believe my luck that I had, you know, decided to leave and travel around. And of course, I landed up just staying in London, and only moved out of London 22 years ago, to move down to the seaside. We left London, but it was 35 years of absolute, you know, extraordinary time. And it was at that time that, you know, yoga was having its first, well, not its first, but a real big wave of interest. You know, in the West, it was coming over from well, particularly through BKS Iyengar. Mm-hmm. And he was, you know, giving exhibitions of yoga at the Wigmore Hall in London, and yoga was really in the air. And I got caught up in that. We were very, very, the people that I stayed with, they were very interested in R.D. Laing. And one day, the man said to Ronnie Laing, he said, "I really don't like my body. I don't really like my body. It's so, I don't like the way it works." And Ronnie said to him, "Well, you know, there's this thing called yoga." So we got very much into yoga, and the first teacher we found, because there were a group of us at this stage, all mainly people from South Africa, really, and we found Donna Holloman, who was BKS Iyengar's right-hand woman, and she was an extraordinary teacher. So she was the first person that we cottoned on to and went to her for classes, and it was really strong stuff. It was amazing. It was a bit like joining the army, and I wasn't a particularly physically disciplined person. You know, I'd grown up in South Africa with swimming and sunshine and all of that, but I'd never done anything. You know, I was always in the reserve team when it came to tennis or netball. And this was really right up at the crack of dawn, practicing, holding headstands, shoulder stands for 25 minutes, 80 back bends, one after the other. It was really strong stuff. And it was, you know, it was very masculine. It was very exacting and rigorous. And it was extraordinary. And I mean, I managed to survive it because I was young, but if I did it now, I would fall apart, you know. But I learned such a lot from those years. And of course, more teachers turned up who were around, also having gone to Iyengar, because he was kind of the source that came to London. And I also went to him when he came over and gave classes.
Yeah, I heard also, I'm curious, were you a vegetarian before or after you got into yoga?
Oh, no, I became a vegetarian, of course. It was part of I grew up on steak and chips.
Well, I'm only asking because I read that you opened a vegetarian restaurant in London, one of the first, I understand.
Yeah, we did. Me and my girlfriends, who, all of us South Africans, there was nowhere to eat a really good vegetarian meal at that time. So we decided to open a vegetarian restaurant, and it was extraordinary. It was a wonderful place. We just found a shop, fitted it out, went to an auction of an old hotel that was closing down, bought all of their old equipment. I passed it the other day, but it's now called the Organic Burger, so it's quite disappointing.
But it's organic.
I know, that's the only sort of thing left.
Well, you know what I would say about that is when I got to New York in 1990, and I got into yoga a year or two after, maybe 92. It was a big deal. Like I did become vegetarian after getting into yoga, not because it was political, just because of like the way my body felt, and I didn't like the way eating meat felt anymore. Yeah. And there was a couple of vegetarian restaurants in Manhattan, and they were like the hubs for the yoga people. We were all hanging out there.
Yeah. Well, ours was a hub as well, and even one evening, Donna Holloman brought Mr. Iyengar for dinner, and we were so excited. You know, we made the most fabulous meal for him, and we had all sorts of. You know, it was very, very exciting. We had actors, and we had lots of. You know, psychotherapy was very much in our circle. We were very much sort of orbiting around R.D. Laing and all of his ideas, but we had Janov, the primal scream guy. He came to eat there when he was in London. He was American, and we also had the lovely David Cooper, who was also a psychotherapist, wrote many books. So there was a lot of discussion and a lot of excitement, ideas, breaking down old values, and it was really extraordinary. We were the first restaurant to serve sushi and tempura.
That's what I was going to ask. Was it like bowls, like rice bowls, or what are we talking about? What was the vegetarian?
Rice balls. We're talking about tempura, vegetable tempura. We got a Japanese chef, a wonderful Japanese chef, and she made the most incredible, sushi rolls, and no, you hadn't seen them anywhere else except in very sort of traditional Japanese restaurants. So we were really, and also it was 2 blocks down from the Abbey Road studios. So we had incredible, contact with musicians. I always seem to miss when the famous ones came in, but the Beatles came in.
My God.
Yeah, and I can't even remember right now, but there were very many people who hang out, because it was just down the road, and of course everybody was into vegetarianism at that time. They were curious about it, and it was a very boring. If you went to a vegetarian restaurant, it was really boring, but we were definitely not boring. It was fabulous.
Yeah. It wasn't just about the brown rice and steamed vegetables. It was the conversation and the people who were there, probably.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was incredible.
What was BKS like while he was having dinner? Like, not everybody gets to see, you see him when he's giving the big presentation or when he's teaching classes and like slapping people into shape or whatever. But what was he like? Were you there when he was there eating?
Yeah, he was very jolly. And he loved the food. And Kira, who was the little girl that I came to be the au pair on, was now about 3 or 4 years old, and she was sitting on his lap and he was telling her stories, and he was really very, very pleasant. He was a lovely guy. He didn't stay all that long, it was quite disciplined and everything, but he was very, very jovial, and was very grateful, that we had gone to such trouble to make the meal for him. Of course, we all asked him questions, and it was an extraordinary evening indeed. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you a question about, like, you and John both mentioned R.D. Laing. He seemed to be a very important influence. And you mentioned in our conversation already here that your experience of practicing yoga with BKS Iyengar and Donna, who I'm in contact with, by the way, and hopefully I'm going to get a chance to be here on the show.
I will send her my love.
Yes, I will. If it ends up happening, we'll see. In any case, my curiosity there is, I talked a little bit with John about like what R.D. Laing was sort of teaching philosophically. And I guess I'm curious, you said this person said, I don't like my body. And he said, well, go try yoga. But then when you go to yoga, it's this very, like, as you said, exacting, almost like 80 back bends or whatever. And I'm wondering, like, how do you see, what was the relationship between what R.D. Laing was teaching and yoga? And was there any consideration? And I guess there wasn't a lot of different options, so that's just what we knew yoga as. But did that kind of like harsh relationship to your body fit with what he was saying? I guess I'm not familiar enough with R.D. Laing to know.
Well, no, it was, there were very few yoga teachers around at the time. So we just found who, just to start studying. He didn't tell us who to go to or anything, but he was doing it from books. And, I think there were no softer forms of yoga yet. It was like really just the very posture related, left foot in, right foot out, going through all of the, postures in a very traditional way. And then at the end doing the pranayama, the breathing. So it was very, disciplined, which was a good way to get into it. But as time went by, there were, a lot of women started teaching yoga, which was interesting because not very many women had taught yoga in the, way back in time. And Donna was the first, and she was very strong. And then we learnt, one of my long-term teachers was Mary Stewart, who was an incredible teacher. She's written many books, Stretch and Relax, and incredible teacher. And then Angela Farmer was around, and things started to soften up when women got involved in the yoga. It wasn't so masculine, there was a lot of more softness coming in. So that changed things, which was wonderful because it was great fun to do all of that sort of, regimented stuff. But it was a bit restricted, and to be honest, when you didn't, we'd save the breathing till the very end. That's how the traditional yoga was, that you didn't think about breathing when you were doing all the postures.
No, you did asana first and then the breathing after, right? Like they were separate almost, yeah.
Absolutely. And to be honest, when we were going through, the postures, I was often holding my breath for dear life to be able to get through it. And so to actually then, when things changed and we met Sandra Sabatini and we met Vanda Scaravelli, to bring the breath into the postures and to not actually be so interested in the exact postures, but to be more interested in the internal work. That was when things really, started to change for me. Because when I gave birth, I met John at the restaurant, and in 1973, I met in 1974, we had my daughter. So by that stage, I had been studying yoga for about 4 years. And in Britain, at the time, there was an incredibly strict medical policy around labour in hospitals. It was called the active management of labour, and it had some good intention. There was some kind of idea of it being a good thing for women, but it was the main idea was that you were to give birth within 12 hours, and really most births first births particularly take longer than that, or they take as long as they take. So, your waters were broken, you were ushered along, you were given a drip if you weren't dilating at the right speed, and you had to, when it got too strong because you were on the artificial syntocin, the syntocin on artificial oxytocin, it became too strong. So then you had an epidural, and then all that cascade of intervention happened, and there you were lying on your back, and suddenly the system that had caused your laying there on your back, like a stranded beetle, saved you. And that was terrifying. It was a conveyor belt, it really didn't work. Cesarean sections shot up, and it was scary. So luckily for me, I was more scared of that than I was of birth itself, because I'd grown up in South Africa where birth was like, you didn't talk about it. My mum had given birth to me, and in 1949, women were tranquilized. They were put on twilight, so they were unconscious as the babies were being born, that they knocked them out. So for me, it was like just a terrifying thing. So I hired a independent midwife, and I got my best friend and John, of course, and our 2 cats, and I gave birth at home. And something that I had dreaded turned into the most incredible thing. It was transformative. It was like peeling away layers and layers of stuff, and it was extraordinary, transformative experience. And I knew then that if I hadn't done that 4 or 5 years of yoga before, it really helped. I don't know how I would have done without it, but I thought, my God, especially through the breathing, I had to trust in my body. My body was I got in touch with my body even through the rigorous yoga. But the breath.
Yeah, can I stop you for a second? That was one of my questions. You've been doing rigorous yoga, and I had Angela on the show, and I remember her talking about kind of breaking from that masculine influence and kind of finding this softer approach. Had Angela done that already, or had you experienced that before this experience of the childbirth, or was the childbirth really what kind of, because it seems like to me the childbirth was like a huge yoga experience, but I'm wondering.
No, I hadn't. I don't think. I just begun to touch on the softer stuff. It was, but when I gave birth, it was still only, the rigorous stuff that I had.
Well, maybe that was good preparation for labor.
It wasn't nothing. It was definitely something, but it was truly the breath work that I had, through the pranayama, I had really focused on using my breath to get there. And it was during the labor that I thought, oh my God, this is wonderful. It's guiding me. It was like following a star in the sky, to find my way through this extraordinary thing that my body was doing. So I knew after, and it wasn't an easy birth. My daughter was in an awkward position. She was posterior, and it took a while to turn her around. Now, if I'd been in hospital, it would have been the same situation as my mom had, which was I was born forceps, because I think I was in a similar, ill position. So my midwife gave me time, and with the breathing and with being at home and, my John and my friend around me, I managed to do it. So it was an extraordinary feeling to come through it, and it was strong stuff. But boy, the feeling afterwards was like, wow, I did it. So I wanted to pass that on to women, and that's when I sort of got to work on bringing childbirth education into my yoga work as well. So it was the kind of blending of those two that interested me. I haven't taught a non-pregnant person for, 45 years. I've taught postnatally constantly, but that's got a particular angle to it as well. So all of my yoga teaching has been around, the childbearing years. That's what just totally took up my focus.
Well, like I said at the beginning of this conversation, to me, someone like you, at the time you were doing that and coming to these, I guess at the time, new ideas around childbirth, 20 years later, pre and postnatal yoga classes are like standard fare at yoga classes, at yoga centers,
Absolutely.
And I guess, I would also just say to you, like, I had my own experience with what you're saying, again, many years later with my wife when she had our first daughter. She too was more scared of like interventions than having the birth herself. And she was too afraid to do it at home, though. We had a friend who had done it at home, and there had been some complications, and she was very afraid of that. Right. So we did manage to find a wonderful midwife who was working at a hospital and had relationship to the hospital.
Right.
But it was so interesting because she did have a very long birth. It was 40 hours. And there was just a point where like the baby wasn't dropping into place. and they wanted, the hospital wanted to intervene. And if it hadn't been for that midwife just like fighting them off and saying, go take a walk, go walk up and down the stairs, and like, doing all these things, they certainly would have, because that was her main thing. She didn't want that to happen. But here's what ended up happening is the baby still wasn't progressing. And ultimately we did intervene some, but she did it so judiciously. Like, they gave her something to help her sleep. They did induce with oxytocin. But by the time she was giving birth, it had been so long, the pain stuff had largely worn off. And she really did get to have an experience like she wanted, Yeah. And I came away with a totally different opinion about the interventions. Like, they could be used judiciously. They're not inherently bad. It's just when you don't honor like what's happening with the woman, it seems to me.
Totally agree. It's so wonderful that we've got modern technology there as a safety net. I wouldn't want to be in the world of birth without that in the background, because we're so grateful for it. But it's just that it's taken over, and that's where things go wrong, because most of the time birth will happen. But when it doesn't and we need help, thank goodness for it. It's a fabulous thing to have in the world. Yeah. So that balance, when me and my group YogaBirth, when we teach, we're certainly giving that balance and not making women feel like, they haven't given birth if they haven't plopped the baby out in water or something like that. It's sometimes you need help, and that's great that it's there.
Yeah. And even before I had that experience of my wife giving birth and dealing with that, and we had another daughter, and that was a whole other experience which you can talk about, but I opened a yoga center in 2007. And at that time I had kind of developed a softer approach. I had been inspired by TKV Desikachar and had a personal practice. And I was bringing in these principles to my group classes, and I was really making waves at all the yoga centers I was teaching at, because they were all doing very aggressive practice. And I was telling everybody that they don't need to do aggressive practice. And so eventually I opened my own place so I could do whatever I wanted without feeling pressured to do something else.
Where was it?
It was in Brooklyn, New York in 2007. And at the same time, I did develop a teacher training program and kind of invited some other teachers on, but I had a full schedule to fill. And there was all these different, styles of yoga out there. And I had to find, what else would I bring to the center that I would feel in harmony with? And there was just no doubt in my mind, top of the list was a pre and postnatal yoga program. And I brought someone in. And my reasoning at the time was that I was very interested in the idea, or I had observed in my own life, that the real benefit and boon of a yoga practice was when it served your life situation. It wasn't this abstract thing that you do to your body. It was about you and your life and it helping you in that.
Absolutely.
And I observed that prenatal yoga seemed to encapsulate this in such a beautiful way, because the women in those classes were all in this miracle of life experience. And the practice that they were doing was specific to that life situation. And it was all about a relationship between the teacher and the women. And they would all bring in tips and clothes and share. And it was this community would build around it. Absolutely. And I thought all yoga classes really kind of want to be like that. They want to serve us in our situation and be about relationships like that. It's just that when you're pregnant, it's such an encapsulated life moment.
Absolutely. And it takes for me, it also takes a particular way of working with pregnant women. And that's really what my whole life's work has been about, is just finding this way of working that works absolutely perfectly. It enhances what a pregnant woman, you just need to bring out what she's already going through. And you learn from that, you learn from her situation, because she's going through this whole process and you are just kind of opening up her up to it. And that's when, from doing the more military stuff. And then coming across Vanda Scaravelli, particularly, it was wonderful. It was like an eye opener that here was a way that you were working, and it was feminine and it was strong, but it wasn't forceful. And
that's my question. What needed to change from like the hard-edged Iyengar method you had practiced in order to make the yoga what women needed for birth?
Well, when I first started doing it, I was really quite upset that all those years of practice that I put in, I had to kind of let go of them. So I had this struggle with myself of, changing. But the more I did it, the more it was so obvious that this is what my body wanted to do, and this is what I wanted to pass on. As you know, you've obviously read her books, but it's working with the breath and with gravity, and it's working from the inside out, and it's working in a way that is much more interested in posture than postures. So everything, instead of leaving the breath to the end, you're bringing the breath in to the work, and you're following the breath in all the postures. So there's a movement going on when you're breathing that is right inside there. There's lots of other movements going on as well, cerebrospinal fluid, and John could go on about all the other movements.
Yeah.
I sort of stay with the breath.
Breath movements plenty.
Plenty for me. And basically, when you tune women into this breath movement, and then you work with that breath movement, and you bring in the feeling of gravity, and you combine it with the breath movement, you get this extraordinary connection with life and the earth pulling you, and you growing up from the earth. And it could be in any position, that you're in. It's the same formula, but you just do it in different positions. And somebody said to Vanda once, why do we bother to do postures then? Because it's the same thing. We're working with the breath and gravity. And, you could do it in standing, you could do it in sitting, you could do it in whatever. And she said, because we like it. We like doing yoga. It makes it more interesting. But if you're working with the inside, then it's all the same. But, you make it more interesting. And yoga, that kind of yoga just seemed to be made for the rounder shapes of pregnancy. The military stuff I always think when I was trying to soften the military stuff, it still felt like clunky. It was still clunky. I was still it was that, left foot in, right foot out, stretch this, pull that. It was all right. We'd made it softer. But as soon as this came in, it was like fitting, not like fitting a square peg into a round hole. It fitted. So the more we worked with that, the more it's just exactly right. And I think a lot of people think that it's a bit too soft, but it really isn't meant to be soft. When you're working from the inside out, you can make it really strong. If you follow the breath right to the end, that work is continuous. You really get, it's like putting on a bigger suit. You keep growing into the posture as you exhale, and it's very hard work, and you can I or make it as strong as you like, which is what we do with the women. Yeah.
Well, I think it's a little bit you have to kind of define what you mean by strength. Like making it a strong asana sometimes for some people means muscle effort. Yeah. Like making muscles stronger. But kind of what you're saying to me, it's strong in terms of like depth. Like you have to have your attention there, and you have to have a breath facility, which is work
Yes.
in and of itself.
Yes, and the muscles join in, the long
Sure.
levers, the legs and the arms. Once you sort of work from the center and you follow your breath and you start to follow that exhalation to the end, things start to happen to the legs and things start to happen to the arms as the posture grows. You grow into the posture. If you follow it to the end of the exhalation, your feet, if you're standing and your feet are on the ground and you follow that exhalation and your feet travel down into the earth, you grow taller. So your arms might want to come up and you might want to really grow as long and as tall as you can. But when the exhalation comes, then you soften. So with each exhalation, you soften, and then with the next exhalation you grow, and then when the next inhalation comes you soften, and then the next exhalation you grow taller. So it's endless, and then you come out of the pose. So it's not, it's so boring getting into a posture and just staying there and nothing's happening. When you tune into the breath, it's like turning the light on. Suddenly there's work going on that perhaps nobody can see from the outside, but it's almost like you're growing into a larger suit. You're growing into your spine's lengthening, your muscles are lengthening rather than, becoming like a bodybuilder. They're getting lean and long and strong. There's that feeling to it. Mm-hmm. And working from the inside out, when people are working on the big muscles in their body, when they're when they're pregnant, if you're working on these thighs and your biceps, you're taking away the energy from the center. And babies really need all the energy you've got when they're growing. So to really be working on, those big poses that you're groaning to hold them and, working really like gymnastically, then you're taking away from the baby. So it's something that is just something beautifully made. It's almost made. It is made for pregnancy. It's hard to describe, but
I actually think there's other ways we can describe it. But first, before we get back to the childbirth, because I want to go there, I'm curious to hear a little bit about your experience of working with Vanda. There's few people on the planet who could speak direct to having experience with her directly. And I think you just, wonderfully articulated some of the things I've heard talked about with her teaching, like the grounding into the, your feet. Yeah. And you're talking about breath movement, which is huge in the Descartes teachings. It's all about that expanding and contracting breath movement happening in you at all times.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm curious how, one, was that idea about breath motivating the poses, is that something you took from Vanda? And what was it like working with her? I understand she only really worked one-to-one. Do you remember the kind of ways that she was cueing you with breathing? Did she teach Ujjayi pranayama or any specific breathing, or was it just pay attention to your breath? What were kind of the specifics in terms of the way she cued you into some of these ideas about breath?
Well, by the time we got to her, she had honed it down to almost like the smallest instructions. And to be honest, John was far better at hearing her than me. So he translated an awful lot of what she told us, because we'd often go, the two of us together, or there would be someone else. Diane Long would be in the class with us, or Sandra Sabatini, who really also was one of my main teachers. She was terrific. And it's interesting how all of her students around her translated her work totally differently. But when we were in the room, by the time we got to her, it was honed down. And she'd poke you and go, no, stop. And it was extraordinarily, it was a lot of backbends. There was a lot of backbends from standing. And that's where you really, if you grow tall from the ground and you're lengthening and then you start to go backwards, that's the most incredible place to tune into that inner core, into that inner strength. So she'd only let you go as far back as she could see your center was holding you, you know, as you went backwards. And of course, I didn't get very far, but the stronger people were, you know, really getting this lovely lengthening as they went over backwards towards the wall. Very few people went all the way because she'd pull you back, because all of us just lost our center by the time, you know, we started falling backwards. And John was very much, you know, he was an osteopath by that stage. So he really, through talking to her, and we could all, you know, I could listen to what they were saying. She was so excited that he could translate what she was trying to say into osteopathic terms, into anatomy and physiology, you know, because she had gone far beyond that in her understanding of the body. You know, she wasn't being specific anatomy and physiology at that stage. It was gravity and the breath. And that was what it was. That was all there was. So you just had to really focus on that, and whatever happened, happened. But she was extraordinary. She was a contessa. I found her terrifying, but she was so kind, but she was brusque. You know, she didn't, no messing about, just do this, do that. Beautiful, and then you'd all have lunch, and she was so kind and lovely. And when I told her that I was interested in childbirth, I was only working with pregnant women and postnatal women. One day she walked into the studio, this front room of hers, with a grand piano, because she had been a concert pianist for many, 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 many years before she got, well, I think she was probably doing yoga at the same time. So, you know, she was really talented, extraordinary woman. And she walked in with this piece of paper, and it had been torn out of a magazine, and it was the hieroglyph on the side of a tomb in Egypt for birth. The word birth in hieroglyphics is a picture, an etching of, it looks like Cleopatra with the straight hair, with the, you know, the fringe and the straight hair down, sideways on, half kneeling, half squatting on a low stool, and this baby coming out. So this woman is half kneeling, half squatting down on the stool, and this very stiff looking baby is coming out of her. And that's the hieroglyph for birth. So she put it down onto the piano top, and she went, you see? And I looked and I said, yes. She said, you see, she did not lie down. She did not lie down. So she was such a feminist in a way, you know, but it was in very short sentences. And, you know, she was a rule onto herself. You know, she was like, she'd rather go and feed the cats than talk now. Now I'm going to feed the cats. And she was lovely. It was an experience, to be in her company. Extraordinary woman, extraordinary. It was very precious.
Yes, everyone speaks of her as a presence, and then there was all these people around her, like John, and you mentioned Sandra Sabatini. I don't know that name, who were helping to interpret, or they're helping to sort through the experiences that she was facilitating.
Well, Sandra Sabatini really, with John, she was the main one who I then could understand her translation of what Vanda was passing on. And Sandra went very much with the breath. And if you look up Sandra Sabatini, she's written the most lovely, wonderful books on breathing. You should get her on. She's terrific. Italian.
Taking a note.
Yes, no, she's wonderful. So Sandra Sabatini.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.